In this video, we will look at the data integration and federation capabilities of the Dashjoin platform. First, we hook up a small SQLite database. Okay, we connect the database. Then we go to the functions UI and we create a new ETL function. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. So we extract data from a source, transform it using the mapping editor of the Dashjoin platform, and load it into the database we just created. So we will use a small example on GitHub that contains countries information. The target database will be our SQL database. And here we can specify an expression. So what we do is, well, first we want to load the data, and we can use loaded data from this URL from GitHub. So you can see that the system now makes an HTTP request in order to get the data. And it's obviously JSON data. So instead of load, which simply loads the URL to a string, we can use doc to data. So this is a function which actually parses the JSON and displays it in the preview window here. Next, we specify the type. So that's a function which writes into the database. And we have two more options. We can say how to handle existing data. So this ETL function can run multiple times, and we have a couple of options here. Ignore simply appends the data, but that requires that the database table has been created already. Refresh is the same as ignore, but it, before inserting the new data, deletes the data that was previously generated by the last run of this function. So this allows you to ETL two different functions into the same database tables, and you can selectively refresh one or the other source. Delete all actually deletes all of the data in the table, so that's the one we want. And so that's typically what you use when you do an initial import. And we tell the system to create the schema. So once in the mapping editor, we define what the tables should be called and the column names. These are generated in the SQL database right away. So we can create this function right now, and we can now step into it here and open the mapping editor. So what we can see here is that we have a tabular representation of the JSON data that we can see, and we can now use this table to drop columns, to create new columns, and rename the data however we would. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll rename the table. Generically it's called table, and we'll call it countries. Okay, so this will be the name of the table or the collection in the database we ETL into. Looking at the data, we can drop information that we're not interested in, so we can get rid of these here. So these are telephone numbers. Let's remove those. These are currencies. Let's also remove them. That's an emoji. We can also remove this one. IOC, we can also remove. And we now remain with three columns. So first of all, there seems to be a status. So some are deleted, some are assigned. So let's say, and some are reserved. So let's say we want to get rid of the deleted ones. We don't want to ETL them. So we can have a table filter expression down here. So this is the status column. So here we can say a filter which must evaluate to true in order for this data to show up. So we can say status must not be deleted. Okay, so we can leave this field with a tab, and then it's applied, so we can see that reserved and assigned are left over. Now we can actually also get rid of we can keep the status. And this is maybe something interesting. So what I would like to do is to load this data, and we have the name of the countries. And we can now generate a report about which languages are spoken in most countries, maybe. So actually I want to re-add one of the columns to add the IOC. We can use that as the primary key. So you could see down here that the system is complaining that this table must have a primary key. This is because we selected the create schema option. So we need to tell the system which one is the primary key. Actually, this is not a good primary key, as we can see, because there's some missing entries. So I think the alpha 3 is alpha 2 maybe. Yeah, alpha 2 seems to be a valid primary key. So let's make this the primary key and get rid of those two. Remove them again. Okay, so now we have one last little problem, and that is that this column languages is actually an array. So you can see this as a type array here. So if we were using a Postgres database, Postgres supports JSON and JSONB data types, so we could import this into a Postgres database right away. But I would also like to show you another feature, which is on the column, you can say extract to table. So what this does is it takes this array and treats it as a subtable, and it extracts it into a new table called languages. So the table name is the same as the column that we extracted from. We can actually get rid of this one right now. And on this table, you can see that it takes the primary key of the parent table and it sort of unwraps the list, and we get this the languages that are spoken in each country. So in here we need another primary key. So what we can do is we can add a computed column. Let's call it ID. Oh, sorry, not here. We need to say we need to rename it to ID, and the value is $index. It's just the running number, or the sort of the column, the row ID actually. Okay, so this is the first time we actually use this this mapping here. So you can in this mapping. So the default mapping is that it simply picks out the field of the source data we have, but you can also apply any other JSONata function here. So this is a string, so I could append some characters like this in order to get here. Okay, so that's obviously just for demonstrations. I can undo and get back to this. Okay, so I need to specify the primary key here, and I think now we should be done. So let's say OK. And now, very important, we need to update the mapping before we run it. Okay, we can now press on the Run button. It says ETL is started, to reload the page to get the current status. And we can see that the run was a success. We see the start time, the end time, and now we can also have a look at the raw data that we just imported. So we have the countries, we have the assigned status, we have the name of the country, we have the DJ underscore DJ source. This is important information the system adds in order to implement the refresh option. So in case you ETL multiple rows into the same table, we use this to identify the name of the ETL provider that was used. And we have the primary key, which is the this alpha 2 column. So maybe you should have chosen a nicer name, but that's good for now. And we have the languages, where we have sort of an artificial primary key with a row number, also the DJ source. We have the parent foreign key, so that's actually something we need to hook up right now in order for it to have have this queryable. So we go in and say parent alpha, we edit this, and we can say that country's alpha 2, so that's the primary key we actually refer to. And once we've done that and we actually shift reload the page here, you can see that this also becomes a hyperlink, and we can now navigate back and forth between the languages and the countries. Okay, so far so good. So let's now write our query. Go to the query catalog and go into the editor, and we can say, okay, on our SQL database, let's start with the countries. We get the country name. The DJ source we will get rid of because that's not important. And we join it, and we can do the join because we set the primary key, foreign key relationship. we can join this list here, and if we sort by that, you can already see that Arabic, for example, is spoken in these languages. Okay, so now we can also maybe remove this column here and add this onto a dashboard. Okay, which we show in the detailed section about the query editor. So this concludes the section about the ETL. There's a number of functions, other functions apart from load and doc to data that we did touch on. So check the documentation to find out what they are. You can execute queries. You can do a bunch of flattening operations, and also don't forget to check the JSONata documentation about, for instance, the appending of strings and date functions and things like that. So the JSONata website, jsonata.org, is a very good source for that. Okay, thanks for your time and hope you have fun.